Hello, BMCers. Welcome. Happy Black History Month. Thank you for joining us today. I am so thrilled to have with us Samuel Royal and Dr. Cathy Royal for our diversity speaker series, where we're going to talk today about appreciative inquiry. As we know, we're really trying to work on building this autonomous digital enterprise that includes everyone. And as one BMC, I can hope we can come together to take some learnings from today and apply them to how we as an organization collectively make more inclusive workspaces and external spaces for ourselves and all of our stakeholders. I'm going to send a survey out like I do at the end of every session, and then I'll also be sending some leave behinds as well to everyone that's registered. Janelle from Black at BMC will also be dropping a special message into the chat. And as always, I will also be dropping lots of messages and links to resources in the chat too. Today is very special because not only is Dr. Cathy Royal essentially the inventor of allyship, but her son, Samuel Royal, works here. And so we're going to get the unique opportunity to not only hear from a great speaker, but for this incredible person to be interviewed by our own BMCer who happens to be her son too. So I'm gonna let Samuel take it away from here and interview his mom and thought leader in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, Dr. Cathy Royal. As usual, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will have a Q&A at the end. Samuel, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and good morning, good evening, greetings to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules to do just that. As Wendy mentioned, I do have the honor and extreme pleasure to really talk to a woman who's been instrumental in my life, Dr. Cathy Royal, or Dr. Mommy Royal, just to have her discuss and kind of give us some of her history and background into some of her work around DEI concepts, and then just how we BMC or even just individuals can help leverage that as we move forward in our careers, our life, and just our respective journeys. So before we jump into the actual work that we're looking to cover today, or discussion topics around appreciative inquiry, use of self, and some of our other extreme work around quadrant behavior theory, if we have that time, I would like to give my mom, or Dr. Cathy Royal, a moment to kind of give us a brief background of who she is, what got her started in appreciative inquiry, before we kind of jump into that discussion. So Dr. Royal, if you don't mind, good morning again, and maybe just kind of do a quick introduction, please.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, my first thing is thank you so very much for inviting me to do this. And I would like to just put into the chat box, Wendy, hashtag proud mom. So that's the first thing I'd like to do. It is an honor, and I am very, very pleased to be able to do this, particularly in Black History Month, and particularly in this time in our universal world. Pray for peace, work for justice. So how did this all come to be? Part of my work has always been in the civil rights and the social justice arena. My dad and several of the ministers in the Detroit, Michigan area where I was born. We have Mobile and Arkansas and Texarkana, Texas roots, but I was raised in Michigan, and I was raised during the civil rights era. And so there were times when I would have the privilege, and I now know it as a privilege, of being in the company of greats. And when I mean the company of greats, I sat in my mom's kitchen and listened to Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Ralph Abernathy, Reverend John Smedler, and my dad, Joseph Hervey, and the Reverend C.L. Franklin, discussing things like the march in Detroit for jobs as part of the civil rights movement in the 60s and early 70s. And I sat in that same kitchen and listened to them talk about the March on Washington. So as a little girl, that really did not integrate into my thinking about what was happening. So 50 years later, hearing that and having people ask me about it, the reality of it is that the one thing I could say with genuine truth is that they were my dad's friends who smelled like Old Spice. And now here in this life, I'm so grateful for the women and men who were in that room and who imprinted me with an understanding of inclusion and what it meant to be Black in America, what it meant to be a child of African roots in America. So it's been part of my life since I was 12.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So obviously we got a little small glimpse into who you are and kind of what got you interested into some of the work that you do today around organizational development, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. One of the key things that I know that I've been around, obviously, clearly all my life, but for the last 25 years that I can remember, I've always known you to say, hey, yes, I've got work to do on Appreciative Inquiry, I've got work to do on Quadruple behavior theory. And so again, I would like for you, if you could, maybe spend a few minutes really explaining what is Appreciative Inquiry. I kind of have a working understanding of it, but there's always more to learn about your work. And I would love for you to maybe share that with the rest of the team as well.
This is the moment. What we know about human behavior is that people, like plants and other forms of life on Earth, respond to the positive. And appreciative inquiry is an opportunity to look at that. Many people in the organization development world and in the change agent world, as well as in the social justice arena, consider the idea of affirmation one of the key points. So we think about it as a process or as a tool, but I'd really like for us to think about it in a little larger scope. Appreciative inquiry is a philosophy. It's been around a very long time in terms of looking at the notion of affirming what is in the world. It's also a methodology, and you'll see what's coming on the screen now is the methodology. It is a 5D model where we talk about we discover or we define the topic, and that takes us into the process. Appreciative inquiry asks people to share their stories, to share their lived experiences of when they've been in an opportunity to make a change in an area, particularly, so you define the topic. And most of my work in the area has been in the understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So we began looking at what is happening in the world around race and racism that we can see the change. And so we defined the topic as a diversity topic. We also defined it as the understanding of when have people really worked in their most productive and positive spaces to make change. So we discover through that process, we use a methodology, but the piece for me that is so exciting, and also the piece where I am very much committed to helping organizations, groups and individuals move the needle, is when you look at that model and you see the idea of dream. Well, oftentimes people say, well, you know, dreaming. And I would love to remind all of us that everyone in this meeting and all of the technology that we're using is the manifestation of someone's dream. So, and even you, Samuel, I dreamed about the beautiful children that I would have. So that is a manifestation of someone's dream. In that dreaming, however, the action part comes with how you begin to design what happens next. So appreciative inquiry is a methodology that looks at organization development from the perspective of what is working well in order to discover those key themes or practices, and then begin to look at how you want to imagine a preferred future. And one of the things I say to people all the time, so I'll say it here, you're going to have a future. Pray that you do. Now, what do you want it to look like? and how and who do you want to be involved with in that preferred future. So appreciative inquiry is a process where organizations, groups, and individuals, families, communities co-create a preferred future. And in that creating that preferred future, you write that preference. You write it as if it already exists, and you write it present tense, active voice. So we are an organization that manifests our best behavior in order to be the most inclusive BMC possible. So that might be the first thing you would do. And then you go to the design phase. And that's why I push organizations, please don't sit back and rest on your laurels of having written your preferred future. Now you must deliver your preferred future. And that's where all voices in the room, every voice counts, and every voice has something to say or contribute to the designing of that preferred future.
Nice. So you actually answered one of my questions I was going to have for you as we kind of walk through this with regards to why do you believe AI or appreciative inquiry, or why do you believe affirmation is good or important for DEI? And I think you talked about that a little bit when you just kind of went over your processes. But as you talked about that, I was also going to ask you now, just from that discussion, what is it that you feel like you've learned over the last 20 years, 25 plus years, having worked with different organizations from the government level, from the education level, now on the corporate level as well? Feel like you've learned, because you've been teaching, been trying to, teach a lot of individuals. What do you feel like you've learned from your discussions with some of these different respective entities?
One of the most memorable opportunities around appreciative inquiry and the diversity and inclusion space, even the civil rights space, was the work that Alexandra Stewart and I, Aunt Alex,
I know Alex.
wonderful, wonderful white woman. And we paired together, white woman, Black woman, very different backgrounds, but coming together in that co-creation of a shared future. It was the work we did in South Carolina, the great state of South Carolina. And the work was called Imagine South Carolina. And we called together people from all over the state. So that meant we had slave owners and the descendants of slave owners, as well as the descendants of enslaved Africans. We had government officials, we had civil rights activists. So it was that all voices in the room. And Samuel, I just have to tell you, they came to do battle. And I say that in the most endearing way, because there were so many intractable things that were in the soil of South Carolina. And they also came to challenge the idea that there was something to appreciate in the diversity and equity space, because during that time they still flew the Confederate flag at the State House, and there was just a platform of opportunity.
Right.
And on the end of the first day, the conversation was really they were at loggerheads. And I said to Alex, I said, Alex, we have to shift this energy. And the question that I asked, and I said to the entire room, very old, very rich white men, very old, very angry Black men, slave owners, sharecroppers, government. It was just an amazing room of women and men. And I said to them, when you go home, if you choose to come back tomorrow and let us discuss the South Carolina of your heart. Change the dynamic in the room. And so what I learned was that the first questions are fateful. And what you ask about, you will find. Nice. And you will find more of it as you continue to explore it. Now, the thing about appreciative inquiry is it often allows people to say, well, we've done all this wonderful work. So why are we continuing to struggle? Why are we continuing to work? What are we looking for? But if all voices are not in the room, and that for me is what I learned, the environmental scan that an organization must do to make sure that the representation is there. It is the shared vision and coming to the center or the core of what you want to have happen next. So you pull your story, you pull your lived experiences, and you must set up an environment of trust, and you must create opportunities for people to listen.
Got it. When you said that word trust, I used some of your work. And when I say some, maybe like the size that'll fit on my fingertip here. But in my work here as a program manager within our IS&T department, I've worked with customers from our front office area, marketing and sales, as well as our back office, where we work with the order management team to help create contracts and make sure we can get those out to our customers in a timely manner. And part of the work that we do in the PMO is built around trust. And so I use your 3 T's. When you made that word, when you said that word trust, I use your 3 T concept of truth, trust, and transparency. So it was good to hear you say that, and then know that I'm hopefully trying to be able to leverage that in some of my work as well.
Yes. And the core principle for me, or the real the kernel of the goodness in the truth, trust, and transparency model is to shift the conversation from trust me to show up trustworthy.
Exactly.
Because yes, I am my best advertisement for trust. And so appreciative inquiry, quadrant behavior theory, and use of self are the 3 dynamic platforms that we work on at Royal Consulting and entering the territory. And trust and showing up trustworthy is the beginning of the use of self work, because I model what I want to see in others, and I put out there, particularly in the DE and I space, that I am an ally. And I come with the belief that we can do work together.
Right.
It is yours to lose when I don't show up trustworthy. So truth, trust, and transparency. And transparency doesn't mean that I tell you my whole life story the minute we see each other.
Yeah, not so much.
But it does mean that I am speaking to you and I'm saying, these are the things that in my preferred future, I would like to see present.
Gotcha. Very nice. So on the slides here, on the screen here, I kind of took us away from one of the topics of discussion, or some continued topics of discussion around AI or appreciative inquiry. But I did want to see if you could kind of speak a little bit more on what we show here, the affirmative organization, implications for leadership and change. Some of the roles and some of the leaders on this call are just that. What do we need to do to be more effective leaders? And what do we need to do to make sure we're promoting the appropriate change to better ourselves and better the organization as we move our journey, or throughout our journey on our process and our journey. So I know you've got 9 things here, or 9 steps here. I don't know if you want to speak to all of them, but maybe if you could kind of go a little bit into detail here, please.
Yes, and I could speak into forever about appreciative inquiry and how it intersects in my triage for change.
Right.
But the first thing is that organizations are made and imagined, and rarely, I can only think of one example, but rarely do people join organizations to destroy them. Right. So they want the organization to be successful, and they want to see themselves as part of that success. Right. And so that for me is just a core principle of understanding how leaders can manage teams, how leaders can be open to the alteration or the transformation of an organization, a group, a team, and particularly themselves. So we can't give to others what we don't have in ourselves. Right. So if we want equity and inclusion in our team, we also have to have that in our own internal thinking about what the team looks like and can grow and contribute. So living an affirmative life becomes what I talked about earlier as a philosophy of leadership. And that for me then goes to point number 7 about leadership and affirmation. And there are things that the leader or leaders, or there is a leader in every one of us. So wherever
Indeed.
you are, you can lead the way, which is again, showing up trustworthy and understanding the value of holding a positive image of your team and of the work that you and your team can do together.
Right.
So I love thinking about how being the CEO of a small business, I'm a small business owner. And one of the things that I find to be affirming when I doubt myself is to remind myself that this business has been my business for over 30 years.
Yes,
And
I
so
know.
something is working there. So lead with affirmation. And when we talk about the challenge of an organization, so I'm looking at point number 8, creating the conditions for anyone in the organization to thrive and grow.
Right.
And that takes me to South Africa and the work we did in South Africa around appreciative inquiry and the idea of how do we dismantle a huge system that is as intractable as apartheid, and how do we really move an organization, move a nation through the idea that we are all co-creating our preferred future, and assuming that even if the person shows up in your organization org chart as the custodian or as the maintenance or as a vendor, that maintenance man may know more about your organization than you do.
Indeed.
And there's a wonderful film that, this is just fun. It has nothing to do, and it has everything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, and the value of every individual. And it's a French film, so it has it has English subtitles. It's called Mama, There's a Man in Your Bed. And now that is a very evocative statement and a very evocative title, but it talks about how the power of one person joining with an organizational leadership team can actually shift an organization. She knew more about the organization as the maintenance woman,
I'm sure,
than the leadership team. And so they, you have to watch it. It's kind of fun, but for me, the most important thing in that, or any of our conversations, is how do we value every individual?
Right.
And how do we value their contributions?
That's key. You made a comment earlier when you started your explanation about nowhere in your work have you come across an organization trying to, and I can't remember the exact.
Trying to fail. Yeah.
Exactly, trying to fail. And a lot of the words that I use when I work with some of the project team members and some of our customers is that I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning coming to the desk or coming to the office saying, hey, I want this project to fail, right? We're going to come across bumps and bruises. It's just a matter of how do we empower everybody to be the leaders to make sure we get over whatever hurdles that may face us. And like you said, set up for success. So that's great. Mm-hmm. I wanted to then see if we can jump into, because you used the term, obviously you've given us a great overview of appreciative inquiry. You've talked a little bit about use of self, but I want to see if we can kind of go a little bit more into that as well and kind of see if you can kind of give us an understanding of how does appreciative inquiry impact the individual, and quite frankly, for me as an employee or a team member of BMC, how does it impact BMC as the whole when we talk about use of self? So maybe if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yes. We are so wonderful with our technology now, and we give up so much of ourselves, both for the good as well as for some, as a applied behavioral scientist. So, adventures in Nerdland with me around studying human behavior. I know I'm sorry, Sam. But
I already know. That's okay. We still love you. It's all right.
as a behavioral scientist, I'm paying attention to the interface of technology and the human dynamics, or how humans continue to thrive and be in community with each other. So this use of self space in our organizations as well as our communities is so important, because you are your best tool. Any of the tools that we have. And so I'd love to have further conversation with anyone about this, but any of the tools that we have right now require a human being to put them into motion.
Right.
So even our artificial intelligence, or the heater that you have the timer on, it turns off, but it requires you to turn it on and turn it off. So we are the best influencers. So when I pay attention to my use of self and how I engage with the other, that is the clearest point of contact and change. Because when we lose contact with each other, that's when we begin to make up stories about what happened. And that's when we begin to find ourselves retreating to our learned behavior. Because any of the behavior in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space is learned behavior.
Right.
And sometimes good people teach us bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it has been learned, we can't unlearn it. And that's my use of self. That's my ability to look at appreciative inquiry, see when I've been really impactful, when I've been really successful in leading a diversity change, or interrupting domestic violence or police violence, or the circumstances. Sam, I spent a lot of my time in the human trafficking world as well. And not just in rescuing women, but in interrupting corporate spaces around human trafficking. So I am my best intervener. I am my best tool. And when I'm at my best, I am understanding how I use myself. So there are two questions on the screen right now. Is where am I an influencer? Where am I an influencer? I may be an influencer at the school board. I may be an influencer at the supermarket. I may be an influencer in the team. I may be an influencer as I level up. And the other thing I love to ask people in terms of understanding use of self and what I might need to do differently as I look at myself is, how might I be supporting the system I am seeking to change?
Right.
And that's a big one, huge, because sometimes what it means is I am blind to the behavior that is continuing to concretize the changes I want to see happen. Mm-hmm. So what is my superpower as an influencer? Is it the superpower of, looking at myself and waking up and saying, this is my compelling reason for continuing to work for the success of BMC, for the success of my team? But really, how am I making a change in the success for my community members?
Right.
Because when we change at any of the core levels, the whole system changes.
Interesting. So based upon that, what would you say was one of your, or a couple of, or any one incident or one situation where it was kind of the toughest moments to, teach what you've been discussing over the last 45 minutes, 30 minutes, to say, what's the biggest challenge that you've come across in your learnings and your delivery?
One of my biggest challenges is teaching and working with people who have identified themselves as leaders in the field.
Right.
Because sometimes our leaders are connected to a methodology, a thought process, or an ain't it awful scenario. Right. And when we are so hooked on one particular path or one particular road, we interrupt our own ability to change and see a preferred future.
Got it.
So working with my change agents, working with some of my colleagues in the applied behavioral science field has been a place of learning. And so I want to leave with an affirmation. And the one piece that I have learned in that difficulty is that you have to meet people where they are.
Right.
You can't bring them to where you are without understanding where they are.
Right.
And sometimes I'm not the one who should lead the change. Sometimes it should be you, or sometimes it should be Wendy, or sometimes it should be an external person. And the reason for that is that we don't know who can touch the next person, but we do know that if we have that shared vision and we understand our own superpower, we can collaborate to go and do many things. So for example, there are times when, I'll talk to Alexandra Stewart, or I'll talk to Michael Brazel, or I'll talk to John Jenkins, my co-partner in the territory, and we'll strategize. And we strategize all the time. We strategize about who should talk to the CEO or who should have good FaceTime with the CFO.
Right.
Sometimes we get caught in our decision-making or our own ability to want to make a change that we don't strategize in the DE&I, or we don't strategize in how we look at dismantling racism.
Nice.
Sometimes it's men who should talk to men about sexism.
Right.
Sometimes it's white people who should talk to other white people about racism and sexism and power. So we have to be intentional about how we work. And when we are intentional, we also have to support what it is we've decided we want to co-create.
Gotcha. That's actually a good segue when we talk about we have to be intentional as an individual, as a company. But as we talk about, moving forward, particularly what this slide says as we go forward. And I don't know if I've explained this to you, but here at BMC, our vision is around an ADE, which is autonomous digital enterprise, and how we can work with our customers to kind of help them move forward in their business future strategies and their business way of thinking for the future. How can we get those guys onto or into an autonomous digital enterprise mindset, and again, moving forward. So when we talk about appreciative inquiry, we talk about use of self, and I actually would like to have you talk a little bit about your QBT theory if we have a little bit of time, quadrant behavior theory. But as we talk about those items for the remainder of BMC's fiscal year, which wraps up at the end of March, and then our fiscal year restarts on April 1st, what are some suggestions that you would have for BMC, or even the individual, to kind of continue to move forward? You dropped a few nuggets, but if there are any other suggestions that you may have, I think that would be helpful.
Well, I think that the one thing that we, when we were doing the 4D model or the 5D model, we went to design, and in the design phase is the future. What do you want to have happen here?
Right.
And so in that, and then looking at the triple T, the transparency piece, I think that the one use of self nugget that is so valuable to a team is the transparency around say what you want and speak up, declare your intention. What do you want to work on? What do you want people to witness for you as a piece of the change? How do you want to do that, so that your team and you are holding each other accountable? And that accountability also allows your customers, your clients, your vendors, anyone to monitor and manage slippage, because every day is not going to be an AI day. And that is one of the things that I say to people all the time, because I'm an early adopter. I'm one of the co-creators of the Appreciative Inquiry process. And I've said a couple of times, today ain't gonna be an AI day. Now, what do I need to do to reset, to get back to an affirmative? So if I'm not telling anyone what my intentions are about change, or what I want to learn more about in terms of the DEI space, or about my own behavior as someone who has a lived experience of privilege or a lived experience of being historically excluded and currently targeted and consistently invisible. The other person has no idea of what should be in that space.
Right.
So going forward, the individuals on your team working with your clients deserve to have an opportunity to be heard about where their growth edge is. And then the other thing about growth edge is, and I'm going to give a nod to my son, who is a wonderful sportsman, no fault, no foul. Because if I tell you where my growth edge is, that is not a demerit earning position. That is my growth edge.
Right.
And we are there together to do that growth. And that requires really strong leaderships, because it's also asking us to be vulnerable.
Right.
And
that's tough.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's tough. Asking us to be vulnerable is a tough thing to do.
Because we are learned, the learned in us, we are taught that mistakes were made, but not by me.
Right.
And so there isn't any place in the DEI arena where we all did not step in the caca. Somebody messed up.
Right.
And so now what? And that reset is the most valuable piece of use of self that we can give ourselves. It's a gift. And believe you me, your children and your community members, your team leaders are watching how you manage a mistake.
Right.
It is not fatal, but it can become concretized into how you are seen and how you then transmit that into the organization.
Gotcha. Okay. So before we kind of close things out, I do, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I would like to see if you can maybe speak a little bit about how appreciative inquiry, use of self, and then, like I said, your own QBT theory that you developed. How do those kind of intertwine? I understand quickly that QBT, quadruple behavior theory, can be a whole nother conversation for half a day, for a full day. So I don't expect us to kind of go deep into that by no means, but I know you put a lot of work and a lot of sweat equity into that work. And so if there is a way that those three concepts kind of intertwine, if there's something you can speak on that, just to kind of, again, how do we as individuals, or we as a company at BMC, how can we learn from those items?
Well, you're absolutely right. So quadrant behavior theory is the territorial entrance into understanding what is going on in our culture, actually around the globe, around power and privilege and oppression. And sometimes that is a hard space for individuals to live in, because we want the people across the street to change. Right. But we're not necessarily able to look at our own self as a place of change. But the first point of contact for any change is, what is the behavior that is present in the oppression, and what does the behavior need to look like to create the equity and the inclusion and the openness. And so quadrant behavior theory asks us to look at the intersections of 10 of the most prevalent social dynamics or human dynamics of exclusion or inclusion. Right. And it asks us to do that. There's a whole equation and a training model, and my workbook is attached to it. But when we put the three together, the use of self, quadrant behavior theory, and then understanding appreciative inquiry as our path forward, our preferred future, quadrant behavior theory asks us to look at all of the places where I am living a privileged life, or I am continuing to create an oppressive system for others based on race, gender, age, sexual orientation, identity, language, religion, ability, class, language preference. And so that whole notion of my kaleidoscope of identities shows up to be examined, to be looked at, and to be vulnerable about. So quadrant behavior theory is a platform theory for any of the diversity models that we use, because it does speak to use of self. It speaks to understanding how we have earned privilege or unearned privilege. Skin color is an unearned benefit or an unearned restrictor. Gender is an unearned benefit or an unearned restrictor. So we put everything on the culture board, and then we begin to look at how am I entering a room, and we never know which one of our identities is going to show up in an exchange with the other. So it's a contact boundary theoretical frame. You must stay in contact with each other, and we must pay attention to the power. The language is so important. And I'm not talking about just our words. I'm talking about our body
language, exactly.
And the ability to make ourselves absent. You know, oh, I just couldn't make it. Well, you're telling me something when you don't make it to a conversation where we're looking at power and privilege, or where we're creating our preferred future, or where we're discovering, as number 1 says, the hidden history and the impact that it has on our future.
Nice. Well, I think I've exhausted all of my questions for now. I'm sure I could probably come up with more. Miss Wendy, I wasn't sure if we want to use a little bit of time to kind of open up and see if there's any questions that came in directly that we want to see if my mom can, if Dr. Royal can fill.
I absolutely love when you say my mom. I look forward to the day that I get to do something so special as the two of you had to do together today. First off, thank you so much for letting us be voyeurs into this very incredible conversation between the two of you. And we're recording it, and I look forward to hearing about y'all replaying it at, the holiday dinners that you'll have in the upcoming year. Just a really, really exciting to see the two of you having this conversation. So one of the things that I was going to actually ask about, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but I'll ask one question to get started, and then I can start to look through the chat to see what we have. Is when you were talking about, appreciative inquiry, use of self, do you have one specific example where you saw someone in an organization really demonstrate this efficiently and effectively, and the outcome of what you viewed as success for the org, both from the human capital standpoint, but also from a success of an organization, ideation, product type of standpoint?
Well, one of my favorites that I look at often when I'm downstairs in the office that I was telling you about earlier is this one takes us back a little bit, but I'll share this one, and then we can pull others forward. My favorite is when I was working with Dr. Donna Shalala in the Clinton administration, and she was the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And one of her biggest initiatives was a diversity inquiry into the 56,000 employees at the Department of Health and Human Services. So we pulled together a change team. And again, this was new theory in the world at that time. And the team was, they were in a running scale of acceptance of the protocol of appreciative inquiry. But we met for almost a year, and we created a protocol. And this was the first time that we were actually using technology to include all members from the 56,000 employees in the Department of Health and Human Services. And one of the funny things is that the NIH, the National Institute of Health, they really do think that they have more money than God. So they didn't think that they were supposed to come to this. And so we had to get them in the room because they were too busy saving the world. And then there's the health service that they were too busy out creating things to make sure that the First Nations and the Native American communities were being served. But what happened as we came together was that everyone realized that they were co-creating something very important. So then we got very excited about using technology. We got very excited about making sure that anyone who wanted to be interviewed was able to do that using technology. So we trained everyone in the process of using the technology and using the internet and using the intranet for DHH, and also of being able to, how do you shift the conversation? And that's really a key, because sometimes in the DE&I space and sometimes in people's organizational lives, they are very unhappy. So this is not a conversation that says everybody is happy and we're just gonna hold hands and go along. What I saw was every one of the members on that change leadership team, by the time we finished gathering the stories, listening to people from each one of their departments, training individuals in the department to do the AI interviews, everyone on the team was promoted. Everyone, as they say at DHH, made rank. But what was really important is watching the team talk to each other and interrupt the negative. So watching how the training, and I hesitate to call it the training. It is training, but I really like to talk about it as the learning of
Right.
how to interrupt the negative. So that one was DHH, Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Shalala, and the Surgeon General at that time, Dr. David Satcher, as well as the CEO of the SES, the SEC leadership, all wrote a commemorative, but they all were promoted and the organization moved forward. So I'm loving that one. And I'm also really very appreciative of one that happened most recently at the Montefiore Health System in New York City, actually in the Bronx, and in the understanding of what we need to do to help young students stay healthy. This is pre-pandemic, but what was going on at the time was how could Monty, as they affectionately call themselves, better serve the underserved communities of Latina and Black students, primarily Latino, in the Bronx, and the healthcare disparity, and how they also used Appreciative Inquiry to help their delivery system be more responsive to the needs of single parents, to the needs of people with limited discretionary income, but more than anything, to students in schools and school health. That's probably my favorite. My humble brag is DHHS, but my favorite is Monty.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And health equity, I know you and I have talked about this a couple of times, and that's something we could probably talk about again in another series or session, and how important it is. So Eric Olmo, who is our CHRO here at BMC Software, would love to meet you and has a couple of comments. Maybe he even has a question. So Eric, go ahead and take yourself off mute. And for everyone else, please do know that I'm dropping a link to our diversity, equity, and inclusion calendar, which has events every day for Black History Month this month, and events every day for Women's History Month next month. So please check it out and encourage yourself and build your spheres of awareness by attending sessions to help you learn more and help others be heard. All right, Eric, all you.
Well, listen, first, Dr. Royal, I want to thank you. Today it's fantastic. It's a gift, really, to have an hour of your time with all of us, and I think only made the more special getting to watch Samuel be the moderator. For me, I think Wendy saying an hour with the Royals was absolutely the way to kind of characterize this. Absolutely love that, by the way.
My man.
I've been exposed to Appreciative Inquiry in the past, so I got to tell you, it was such a wonderful, wonderful reminder of how effective and powerful this methodology can be for driving change and how well it works across cultures. I guess one thing I wanted to say for some of the leaders that are on this call is, look into this, leverage this. This is actually a really energizing form. If you think about all the things that you're trying to drive across this company, this is a really, really engaging way, as Dr. Royal say, engaging the system into the change. So listen, that certainly struck a chord for me, as did your comment about, forgetting the role that a self we play in driving change. It's, we bring our learned behaviors or habits in ways that help, or in many cases hinder, the change that we want. So again, I think two really powerful things that you said today that resonated for me, and I think have application for everybody that's on this call. If I had a question, it would probably be around, to that point, because there's several leaders on this call that are trying to drive change in multiple parts of the world. So the team, the system that they're pulling together approaches it from a whole host of different perspectives. Is there anything about appreciative inquiry, Dr. Royal, that you would highlight that would say this is one of the things that appreciative inquiry does really well in bridging some of those nuances?
Absolutely. I'm thank you, Eric, for asking that question. And thank you for having an hour with the Royals. This has been a treat. It was such a treat for me. I arrived early because I didn't want to.
Yes, you did.
Not want to disappoint Samuel. There's no way we would have had another good dinner. But anyway, yes, the thing that we didn't really talk about is the protocol. And the one point I would say, particularly in creating a system where you are beginning an appreciative inquiry, is your one-to-one interview. That is the bedrock of AI. So you pull your team together and you do the environmental scan to see who's in the room, who else should be in the room, and what are our demographics, who are the influencers in the room. And again, it isn't to have the influencers be influencers to create a flat structure, but you want to get every voice into the room. Then you ask the participants, find someone you never work with that you want to interview. You want to hear their story, or find someone you rarely work with. Or, okay, you're all in the same room all day, all the time. I got it. Now it's time for you to talk about something that you never talk about. But the first part of the interview is to talk about, and this is how we usually open them. And appreciative inquiry people create their own protocol, so I can't say we always open, but we usually open with, without being humble, talk about a time when you valued something from, and you define the topic, but it's usually about yourself and what you did. And the ending question in that first part of the questioning, first part of the protocol is, what do you value or what do you bring to the team that creates and enhances the effectiveness, the cohesiveness, the performance of the team? So it is that use of self. So it's the opportunity to tell your story. It's the opportunity to have one person be singularly focused on you. And it's the opportunity to do that in a way that is speaking to a specific topic. So the interviewer has the task of staying on task with that person. So it's not a conversation. You are that person's biographer. So you're not coming in and saying, that's just like my family. I have 9 kids and I didn't know you were born in something. No. Stay out of that person's story. And then you switch so that your story is told. So if something was triggered in you hearing Sam's story, you can start your story like that. But the beauty of it is someone is listening to you. And that is the core principle of AI. We start with affirmation, we start with story, and we are a biographer to someone else in our system. And of course, we always say, should you want, that story is confidential. We won't share the story, we'll share the themes. But we also ask people, what was a story that stood out for you that was like, wow? So we can make them public. But the core protocol is get that individual story into the system.
Nice. Cool.
Thank
Well,
you.
My pleasure. I told Samuel, I said, you sure you want this?
Of course. Of
I want to
course.
say too, they have been so, like yesterday we had like a prep call, and I have a social card that I'll share with everyone on the call, and it has the two of them together, and they were, like, we're going to frame this. I love that we've had the opportunity to do this together, because I think it's so meaningful to see the impact of how we invest in our corporate social responsibility, right? Here at BMC is like, we invest in communities, and maybe those people aren't going to work for us directly, but their children will. And I think this is a really great story to tell of the
Absolutely.
continuum of the great work that can happen, and how we can have influence, and how we can have incredible people like Dr. Cathy Royal be interviewed by her son, and like learn something in the process, right? And like make it engaging. And we always know that this work is uncomfortable, and we're not always going to get it right. But I think at the end of the day, if everyone that just showed up today, you're making steps in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So, one of the takeaways today too will be, we will send an email to everyone. We'll have the survey in it. I have an appreciative inquiry document from Dr. Cathy Royal. And then we'll also, give people opportunities to, give feedback and share the social card. And then we'll also have the replay as well too. But Samuel, any last questions for your mom? Because like, we're 4 minutes in, and she'll 4 minutes left, and she'll have to answer it.
No last questions. I will make a couple of last comments, and I'll keep it brief. But again, thank you, Wendy, for allowing my mom as well, allowing Dr. Royal and myself to participate and join you all today. I've known my mom's work for several years, and as a child, you're always probably asked when you were younger, what do your parents do? And quite frankly, there was some times like, I don't know what the hell she does. I know she makes a difference. I can tell you what her title is. But as I've grown older, I've learned not only is she making a difference to others and to this world, but obviously to me as well. And I believe that some of her work around appreciative inquiry is deep inside of me. And I've probably never used the term appreciative inquiry when I talk about who I am as a person and how I can become a better leader for this organization or anything that I do in life. But I do see her work in me. And I just want to say before closing, Dr. Royal, Dr. Mommy Royal, Doc, I love you very much. And I do appreciate you, and just continue to do what you do. The one thing I tell everybody when they ask about my mom is, yes, she's a great woman, small in stature, but when I tell you the biggest damn shoes to fill, they're the biggest shoes to fill. So thank you very much. And again, thank you, Wendy, for allowing us to be here today.
As a mom, I'm like tearing up a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh. Dr. Cathy Royal, any last words for you? All right, well, be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and we'll take all of this with us today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. See you later, Doc.
Bye, baby.